Let's start off by talking about the foundation for any software engineer, which is the ability to write code. How do you learn to write effective code? How do you write good code? And the answer is very simple. You learn to write code by writing a lot of it. But the nuance here is how you write the code. And this is where a lot of people, most people, will screw up. You've heard this expression called tutorial hell. And it's hell because you're spending a lot of time and energy in tutorials, and actually you don't get the outcome that you're looking for, which is properly learning how to code. So I'm going to plot out for you the relationship between writing code and tutorials and how they interplay with each other. So on the y-axis we have time, and then on the y-axis we have the value of a tutorial. So when you're starting off, you know nothing about coding. Tutorials are actually incredibly helpful. They give you a step-by-step guide on what you should do, how you should do it, and that hand-holding, those training wheels, are incredibly valuable. So you start off with a ton of value. But as you become more experienced, they start to lose their value because you're not really learning much if you just copy-paste whatever the instructor is doing. And so it goes down in value. And what is ironic, or what is really interesting, is that as you become more senior, the tutorials actually end up hurting you. They poison your ability to be creative and take the training wheels off because now you've become so reliant on the tutorial. And so it falls into negative. And that is what I would describe as tutorial hell, where you're so dependent on the tutorial that you lose the ability to write original software on your own, and therefore you are no longer an effective engineer. I would not want to hire someone who needs that level of handholding. One of the beautiful things, and also one of the challenging things about coding, about the tech industry, is that code is infinitely malleable. So if I give you a problem, I can promise you there are going to be thousands of ways, infinite number of ways to tackle that problem. And the issue with the tutorial is that it is showing you one way, one reasonably good way of tackling that problem, but it's likely not going to be the way that you would have come up with your own solution. And the learning happens in that exploration, where you try out different solutions, you figure out the pros and cons, and you might come up with an equally good solution, which just happened to be deviate from the tutorial. And you rob yourself of that opportunity if you're so blindly focused on following the tutorial. And this is also the reason why I'm not a big fan of books or certificates. The same problem applies here, where because you're so focused on reading a book or passing a certificate, you're not really giving your brain the opportunity to be creative and explore, which is where the true learning how to code happens. And so if earlier in my career, when I was learning Java, for example, I would go to the library and literally pull out a book about Java and spend half an hour every night reading a chapter. And what a complete waste of time. Reading how to program is not the same as programming. And you're not going to really achieve much or learn much if you are reading and you don't have your hands on the keyboard. One of the things that I feel like people get hung up on when I give them the advice is that they somehow have this mental block of messing up because they've gone through the school system where they're rewarded for having the correct answer and they're punished for having the wrong answer. And again, this is why I love software, and this is why I love the tech industry. There's very little or no cost to failure. If you're following a tutorial or if you're trying to build your own project, which is what I'd recommend, you can screw up, you can see the compilation error, you can see why there was a crash, and then you can go back and fix it. And you can do that all within a few seconds. And so if you work hard and you're okay to tolerate discomfort, you're okay to tolerate not knowing what's happening and just fool around, you can get really, really far within a day, within a week, within a few months, and that will allow you to learn the code at a much, much deeper level compared to anyone else who is using the guardrails or the training wheels that come from a tutorial or a book or a certificate. And finally, one thing I want to share is from my own experience. I got into Android while I started working at Pinterest. And I kind of muddled my way through. I was able to follow some tutorials. I was able to copy the code in a certain way to make whatever change I wanted to make. I never really truly understood how do I do Android. And ironically, the first time I felt confident in my ability to develop Android apps is when I started teaching Android. So I signed up to teach for this boot camp, And in the process of teaching, I went through a tutorial literally 4 or 5 times. I went through the exact same tutorial and then I started to extend it in a certain way. And I made my own custom modification. And that was where I had enough depth of understanding where I could tell you exactly what every line of code was doing, why it was important, and what would happen if I change it from this line to that line. And that is what I'd encourage you to do, is go deep. So even if you have a tutorial, that's fine. Use it as a starting point. But then I want you to break the tutorial. I want you to extend it. I want you to go much, much deeper into it. And teaching is actually an effective way of forcing yourself to do that, where teach it to yourself or teach it to another person. And that will force a level of clarity that is incredibly important for your maturation as a software engineer learning to code.